As doctors, we tend to move around a lot. Every state has different rules. It's vital that whenever you start off in a new state, you actually go through the rules. And I think everyone who gets their payslip for the very first time, they should look at it and try to understand what every single line means.
Now, is it practical to review the payslip every single fortnight that I receive?
We should never assume that someone else is doing everything right. So you always have to have a bit of vigilance on this. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another installment of the Investing for Doctor podcast. I am B, and we have Mr. Munzural here from KHI Partners here today with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, B.
Hello, Munzural. So in this installment of our podcast, we'll be talking about the first few things that an intern will experience when they start on their employment. So it's going to be talking about the basics of being an employee, how to look at your payslips, what sort of taxes you're supposed to pay, superannuation, and we touch a bit about Hecs, as well as the different enterprise bargaining agreements that the different states have. And we do a little bit of comparison between them. And also we talk about the pitfalls to avoid. We obviously also going to talk about some scary stories and outcomes that we have seen in our careers. And it's really about the pitfalls and to avoid.
Beautiful. Big. Look forward to.
We hope you enjoy this episode. As we all know, a lot of us doctors, we all start off somewhere. And that is going through medical school and then internship. So we're going to start off from the very beginning today. And this will be a series of podcasts highlighting the journey from internship all the way to being a more sort of senior doctors and so on and so forth.
Lovely.
But back to basics. And so first of all, everyone that finishes medical school, the first thing they do is they sign up to become an intern.
Yes.
And that's obviously a big change in life. And for many doctors, that is the first real full-time job they get themselves involved. And it is also the first time they become an employee under a massive organization. Munzural, in your experience, do you see that often a big pivotal point in a person's life?
Oh, mate, absolutely. And this is where I'm probably giving away my age, right? I remember that back in 1996, when I was sort of a trainee accountant, right? And this was my very first employment. And I still remember that it was a weekly pay. And at the end of the week, our proprietor at that stage is that what he used to do is that he used to go around on every single desk, and it was a hand delivery of a printed copy of the payslip.
Wow, okay.
And it was being done on every Friday. And we were anxiously used to wait every Friday. That was the moment of the joy. You get this one piece of paper, you know exactly what your income was.
And back then, did they also give you an envelope with your pay in it as well?
Yeah. It was a piece of paper and an envelope attached to it, all printed.
Wow,
right?
All right. So look, how times have changed. I'm sure that at one stage it was cash and then it became a check and then it became electronic transfer. So thankfully, we don't have to deal with that anymore. But, you know, we do, however, have to deal with a very complicated sort of systems of, having pay slips and that sort of thing. So I guess, first of all, from the, the legal and accounting side, we know that employment is basically a contract between the individual and a large organization. And I'm going to use New South Wales Health in this situation. And just for example, obviously, every state has their own sort of rules. What are the things that intern receiving their very first paycheck should look at? And this is just general, because there's a lot of things specific in healthcare. Absolutely.
And a really good question. As I open-ended, but very good question. And the reason I say this, that there are a whole bunch of generic things that as a sort of an intern, as an employee, that we should look into. But there are some very specific things that one need to be very careful and mindful as well. So we look through some of the generic thing, right? Number one is that, do we have a contract? And if we have a contract, what does our contract say in terms of our employment income? And do I have that same level of income as my salary, right? Do I have the super being provided in the right way? Is it the right level of SGC? Do I have a contract that I get additional level of super? So is it the standard, the minimum super? Do I get 15? Do I get 18% if an organization has higher? So we do that maths, right? Do I have this, right? Number 3 is that do we have the annual leave which is being accrued? So annual leave is as we get 20 days per year, right? So that sort of 20 days gets accrued on a small bits and pieces
and on
along
a pro rata
the way.
rate, of course.
On pro rata basis, right? Is it being accrued in the right way? Do I have an accrual of the sick leave as an example, right? So you get 10 days of sick leave, generally speaking, and each organization be different. So do I have that 10 days of sick leave as such is being done? Then we look into the matter that as the tax being deducted in the right way, very fundamental, right? Because if it is your first employment, is that they take the threshold out and then they do the tax maths, right? But you need to notify to your employer, do you have a Hecs obligation? Do you have a loan obligation, right? So if there is a Hecs obligation as an example, that this is your salary, this is the tax being withheld, and this is the net being left. But if there is a Hecs, what they do is that they take away the Hecs from the salary, so you get the net, so you don't get a big hit at the end. Are they being taking the Hecs in the right way? And then this could be your second employment as an example. Let's say you're doing something on the side as a part-time, and this is also your second. You don't get too lot of tax-free threshold. So if you're already claiming the tax-free threshold in somewhere else, then the question is that are they taking the tax-free threshold again? And if they're both being taking the tax-free threshold, then what it does at the year end is that when we as the accountant, we do the return, we say, oh, there was not enough tax being taken. So you got that surprise tax bill, right? So all of those things are some of the basic things that one need to. What I do want to say at the same time as well, just touching some of the sophisticated things, your designation, your role, what is exactly what your role in terms of the payslip, that is quite fundamental.
That's right.
2 reasons that's fundamental from us as an accountant, right? One is that when the accountant does the tax return, is that one of the item what we have on the tax return is to say what is the profession of the individual that we're doing it. Now, ATO has got a benchmarking. On the basis of the profession that you are, ATO's benchmarking are, these are the work-related deduction we expect you to have. Now, if that profession is being done in the wrong way or slightly in a different way, then ATO's benchmarking says we can claim this. And if I, as an accountant, I go ahead and claim this, then that creates an anomaly. And that anomaly by itself has an audit risk. So that bit of the profession needs to be done in the right way. And the last comment which I want to say is that also in terms of the finance side of it as well, that when we do the bank loan and the finance, is that your profession comes in very useful from the bank's point of view.
Yes, definitely.
Right? Because it just brings in a tangibility. So it's a simple one piece of documentation, but it has so many ramifications.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we're just touching on the general kind of payslips to look at.
That's right.
And when Munzural said, the classifications, the hourly rate, and all of those things will be in what we call our enterprise bargaining agreement. And because it's it's a big monolithic organization in New South Wales, so basically every doctor and every hospital will have the similar sort of pay rates, terms, and those actually go beyond what you will see, out in the open, right? So, for one instance, in healthcare, we often have this idea of ADO, as you said, it's a day off that you accrue because we are technically working 40 hours a week, but according to the standard is that it's a 38-hour pay week. And so what we do is that they take out 2 hours and then that will accrue, and every month you get a day off.
Right.
Yeah. So again, those things are very important to look at from how things go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The other aspect of it is obviously overtime.
Yes.
Because no doctor really works 38 hours or, the 40 hours overtime. And one needs to be really, really careful, from my experience, about how we look at the amount of overtime you've put in and how much overtime they paid you, and are they paying you all your penalties correctly according to that.
As well as the super, right? Like whether the super sort of comes in as part of that overtime,
Absolutely.
has the super being paid, and where is the super standing?
Yeah, and the fact is that do you actually get paid super on your overtime? Now that's all written in the enterprise.
Absolutely, and see, good question, right? Because generally speaking, is that there is a general rule, and there is, when you say enterprise bargaining agreement, there is specific rules, right? So you've got the overwhelming general rule, and the overwhelming general rule is that an employer is not legally obligated to pay super on the overtime, right? Because it's not the OTE, as they call it, which is the ordinary earning income as such, right? So generally speaking, but many of the organizations, they've got their own rules, is to say that, yes, we'll pay you the super, we'll do this as such, right? And that's where it comes in. So a similar example is that, say, the maximum super contribution at the moment is 30,000, right? It used to be 27.5. Now, when you reach into that 30,000, again, the standard rule from the employer's perspective is that they don't need to pay any more super.
That's right.
Let's just say if someone is earning 500,000, right? As soon as it hits that 30,000, which is the minimum super, employer can sort of say that we're not paying any more super. That's the general rule. But if the enterprise bargaining agreement sort of says that, no, we would keep receiving the super, irrespective of whatever our income is, then we need to make sure that we're getting that in our payslip.
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing is that as doctors, we tend to move around a lot.
Yes.
And every state has different rules as well. So it's vital that whenever you start off in a new state, you actually go through the rules. You know, when we come to talk about the different rules and what it looks like in different states, you'll find that some states are paid much better and some states are paid much worse. And, you know, I'm going to take this opportunity to call out New South Wales that right now is probably one of the worst states to be paid to be a doctor, whilst it's probably one of the most expensive states to live in. And so there's a bit of like a workforce imbalance going on there. And a very topical subject is, you know, the doctors' unions are actually having a bargaining time with the government to sort that out. So I've got an example of a payslip here, and look, looks very complicated, you know, and especially with all the penalty rates, the different percentages that you have a loading on top of that, and when does the time starts, for instance, right? So if you're doing an evening shift, you're going to get a little bit like a 12.5%. If you're doing on a weekend, you could possibly get 50% loading. And if you're working on a public holiday, you actually get some accrued leave back. So sometimes people like to work on public holidays because they get a little bit more. But yeah, it's a very complicated topic, and I think everyone who gets their payslip for the very first time, they should look at it and try to understand what every single line means.
I agree. And then sort of because the payslip is very often is a accumulated payslip. So when you've got your tax obligation, as an example, that the tax withheld is that you've got your fortnightly tax withheld or monthly tax withheld, but you also got your year-to-date tax withheld, right? So it's an accumulated. Same as your annual leave, which is an accumulated, right? Sick leave, which is an accumulated. So what I say to my clients very often is that definitely you look into your payslip first time, right? Now, is it practical to review the payslip every single fortnight that I receive? But maybe once in a while, right? Because it's an accumulation, is that even if you check it, you check it first, and then even if you check it once in a month or so, and you just cross-check and whether all those things are fine. Because the reason I say this, is that these are all being automated, right? So it is really someone is an operator, is a bookkeeper, is an accountant sitting in there and manually sort of inputting all of those information in the first place on the basis of contracts and how it is. Yeah. Now, once that's being done, yes, it is being system generated, it copies, right? But system has anomalies at times, right? System drops off and this happens. Not intentional, but it does happen.
Yeah. And the thing is that you assume that the person that set up the automation has set it up correctly.
That's right.
And I've got a very interesting example that I actually met this week. I had a friend who's essentially a year before finishing his training. And I just asked a couple of people, hey, send me your payslips, or, you know, if you're happy for me to have a look at them. And what we recognize is that he was actually on the wrong pay scale.
Good luck.
This guy has been a registrar for many years, but he was still on the resident pay scale.
Right.
And so and this is a specifically New South Wales example. In New South Wales, you start off as a resident, and then when you have an increased role, you move on to the registrar pay scale.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that pay scale caps off at 4 grades. So 4 levels, I should say.
Right.
So we think about grade as in, what is your role? Are you a resident? Are you a registrar? Are you a consultant? Are you a CMO, for instance, right? And then as you progress along that role over different years, you get paid a different a level. Unfortunately, the levels caps off at a certain number of years. So if the first year registrar, you get paid X, second year, third year, fourth year, and then it caps off.
Right.
So after that stage, the only way you increase your pay is by inflation or by a certain percentage going up.
Yeah.
This poor friend of mine, he was actually being paid at the resident pay scale, which is almost one level down.
Right.
And he's probably been on that for years.
Right.
And that's through sort of no malicious intent, but just someone at some stage forgot to push him up a scale.
So a couple of points, right? I mean, the point number one is that gentleman on that example has got the right to go back and say that, yes, I need all this backdated payment, right? Point number one. Point number two, which I also sort of say is that this is where the accountants comes in as well, that even if you sort of say that, well, even if it is on an annual basis at a bare minimum, when you're doing a return and you sort of say, well, while you're doing a return, do you mind of just cross-checking these couple of things for me and just to make sure that it's fine, even if it's annually, right? And the third comment which I want to say is that how important these pay slips are. So these doctors, right, when they go ahead and say that, all right, I want to buy my own home, principal place of residence, I want to buy my investment properties and further things, very often bank asks for 2 or 3 last pay slips. Right. And sort of whatever the income on those 2 or 3 last pay slips is, that it has a strong bearing on the serviceability. So one can almost plan for it. Right. So say, as an example, if you're applying for a loan and if you're sort of saying that, well, over the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, I'm not really doing a whole lot of overtime. So that may not be the right time to apply for the loan. Right. Is that when we do the overtime. Now, it's all full disclosure to the bank and bank understands that we've done the overtime, we've got a bit of an additional payment. So there's a bit of planning there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for this friend of mine, now he's going to be in the awkward situation where he would have been underpaid superannuation.
Yes.
He would have been underpaid, his normal wages.
Yes.
And that would have been over years. And what he's actually lost is years of that money.
Yes.
Being in the system for him, working towards
and see, if I think it through, right, if he were to take any annual leave within that period of time, means that all this annual leave that he's taken at the lower rate.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
And technically there should be an adjustment on that annual leave as well.
Yeah. So I think after hearing this podcast, everyone's just going to go back to their pay slips and check that
you got to check that correctly. You got to check it once in a while. Definitely.
You got to check it at least, once a quarter at the very least, or when you move up to a different role.
Yes.
Your new pay slips, you need to definitely have a check.
And as an employee, as a doctor, we've got a full right to ask any question, right? Of course, they can ask all this question to the internal accountant. Is that doesn't make sense? I'm not understanding it. Explain those to me.
Yeah. All right. So I think we covered a bit about the income coming in. Yeah. And so I guess, when you first start, there's a couple of things to set up. As we said, you got to make sure that you're getting paid right, but also that your taxes are being withheld right. And I just got to go back to one of that other example you mentioned. If you have a side gig before you started medicine, not to double dip on the tax-free threshold. And what I often see is that the doctors will probably change their full-time job back into to give the threshold for that, and then cancel the threshold for the other one. Is that something that you see when people move from one work to another workplace, that if they're still continuing on both sides?
Good question. There's 2 things, right? I mean, number one is that as long as we claim the tax-free threshold into one employment, That's the golden rule, right? One employment at a particular point of time, then it would be more or less correct, right? The tax which is being withheld by the employer is that it's always being withheld with the best possible knowledge. It's never meant to be absolutely perfect as a science, because that's where we do the year-end tax returns, where we do the adjustments, but to the best possible, right? So as long as you do one level of tax-free threshold, then you're sort of reasonably okay. Second thing where we got to be a little bit careful is that also the doctor's pay changes along the way, right? So when, let's say, if you sort of earning that much income for a period of time, your tax rate is being done on the assumption of this. And then let's say in about 4 or 5 months time, your income just gone up by, 30%, 40% income because you went to a different level. You sort of completed your degree, you went to a different places as such. All of a sudden you're paying a lot higher level of tax, which is fine. But what that means is that the original tax which was being withheld, even though he was correct in the original math, but when you do the pro rata for the entire 12 months, is that perhaps he paid a little bit less tax. So whenever we have a significant pay rise, all we do is that we stay conscious about it. And if it needs to, we just bounce off with the accountant saying that, all right, this is the tax which was being withheld, which was right. Now, this is the new tax which is being withheld, but I've got I suppose, a combination of the smaller amount of income and the higher amount of the income. Is my average tax still correct?
Yeah. And sometimes you obviously get people come around, why do I pay tax at the end of the year when it's supposed to be calculated? And that's clearly going to be one of the reasons for that, because as we all know, the shift in grade happens in January, February for most doctors, depending on which state they are, and so you move up that grade in the middle of the financial year. So.
And the vice versa as well be, right? So say as an example, it's say, someone taking a maternity leave and someone saying that, all right, I'm taking 6 months time off, right? So you could be a very high income, but you sort of earn the income only from July to December, and you really don't have any income from January to June. And from July to December, the income is being done assuming this is going to be your income for the 12 months, means that there's significant tax being withheld. On that example, this is the example on the other side of the spectrum. On that example is that you overpaid the tax and you get a certain amount of back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of people who get upset that they have to pay tax at the end of the year. It's like, it makes no difference, to be honest. And the way I say it is like, if you owe the ATO money because whatever you've done was completely legitimate, then that's money you had in your bank account offsetting. And so not to get too salty about that.
And we say when we do the return base that we always go through with the logic. We sort of say, okay, let's go through with the logic. And the logic is that, are we missing anything in our logic, right? Say about 18,000, you pay no tax, right? Then you go into a smaller marginal rate, and the marginal rate sort of increases over a period of time, right? I think the biggest thing, again, to go back where people sort of fall off very often is the Hecs obligation. So very often we don't communicate the Hecs. Very often is that because the Hecs also goes on a percentage basis, right? Based on the income that you earn, this is the amount of the Hecs that you do. So we may have communicated to the initial employer as an example saying that, well, I've got a Hecs obligation, and the employer says, all right, we'll withhold that much of the Hecs. And then this person could be a specialist, he's working in 2 or 3 different places, right? All of a sudden his total income is much higher than what he was anticipated in day one. Means that his Hecs obligation goes back in the higher rate, right? So Hecs is the one is also to stay in touch with.
Yeah. And I'm just going to touch on this, but not go too much detail into it. It's just that when you claim salary packaging, the meal and entertainment, that will actually push you up for your Hecs for quite a bit, because the way the Hecs is calculated has some funny maths in it. As well.
It's a reportable, they call this adjusted taxable income. So it's actually not the taxable income, it's the adjusted taxable income. So there's a whole bunch of other things which gets added. So you're
exactly.
Right.
So if, when we claim salary packaging and all these sort of stuff, we get a freebie by not paying tax on these things. Yeah. But when it comes for the calculation for the Hecs, they look at that freebie and increase that by the amount of the taxes that you would have paid.
Yeah, 100% B. And the reason why it is because in your payslip, what it does, or the annual PAYG payment summary, as we used to have the annual report, right, is that it comes in as a reportable, very often as a reportable fringe benefit. Means that you've got a bit of freebie, but it's a fringe benefit being provided, which is not taxable, but it is still reportable. Yeah. And where it is reportable, not being taxable, it gets added on your tax as an adjusted taxable income for the Hecs and a whole lot of other purpose. Yeah. But it's just that you don't pay tax on it, but it gets added for it.
Okay. We'll touch on that topic next time because we could go on for hours about that.
Yes, I agree.
So I guess the next part of the things is that when we look at the different states and about the enterprise bargaining agreements, because it's a very topical subject now. We see a lot of other sort of healthcare professionals getting really good boosts to their EBA rates. For example, the Victorian nurses have managed to secure a 15% raise over X number of years, which is great for them. But then coming back onto the doctor side, we always seem to be a bit anemic on the way we present these enterprise bargaining agreements. But without going too far into that, I wanted to point out that every state is very different. And it's important to actually have a look at what pay scales there are, right? Because as we mentioned, in New South Wales, there's only 4 pay scales for registrars. And then there's a senior registrar pay scale, which is very difficult to be accredited to get onto that one scale. Whereas in some other states, the scale could be, they have like 6 levels. So the natural progression in wage increase gets, you get a lot more wage growth the longer you stay in training. Fundamentally, that's a problem in healthcare with the disequilibrium in the States. And I don't think there's a good way to solve any of these problems. But I urge everyone to have a look at what your enterprise bargaining agreements are, and compare it if you have an offer to go interstate and that sort of thing. And obviously, this is when you first start off at the pointier end, after you finish a fellowship and you become a consultant, there's also a staff specialist, enterprise bargaining agreements. And again, they're very different.
And there are professional who specializes on those things, right? And it sort of almost even goes beyond an accountant, right? There's Absolutely. Not really an accountant, but you've got those specialized lawyers who specializes just purely on the enterprise bargaining agreements, right? You've got those employment lawyers who sort of specializes on those, right? And even if it is that if it's need to be is to say, well, we'll just get a 1-hour consultation and we'll just run this through with where we are, that whether everything is there.
Yeah. And I think there's been quite a bit of a grassroots sort of movement amongst the JMOs, amongst the doctors union, MSOF, and also with ASMOF, not ASMOF, which is the Australian Salaried Medical Officers Federation, and also the AMA, where they choose to collaborate together. Right. And they actually have quite a number of sort of educational sort of articles about different sort of pay obligations. I've got the New South Wales one here, and it's talking about what your obligations are, what the employer's obligations are, and the thing is that this is a constantly shifting kind of topic as well, because every so many years they go and renegotiate these things. So what you believe when you're an intern may not be true when you're a registrar, and or when you're a senior registrar. And I guess from our perspective, it's also to educate, and having an accountant who understand some of these things is also very important. I take it that you're aware of these changes, and it could be just a simple question like I asked my friend. It's like, are you sure you're supposed to be on this this level of pay? And he messaged me back, oh my goodness, it's like, yes, I've been on this for years. Yes. And so now he has to go dig back and go through all of his previous pay slips, find out where he's been underpaid. And I assume that's going to be quite a big piece of work to reconcile that.
And quite a bit of piece of work. We had to do that number of times actually when I go through, is that where it's said that it's quite a bit of work, because you go through with the government bureaucracies and system and process, it takes time, right? It takes quite a bit of time. So perhaps the best advice is that at an annual basis, if you get your accountant to read through and say that, have a look through my payslip on an annual basis at a bare minimum, right? Have a look through my contract, whether I'm still in there. And from an individual basis, as you said, at a bare minimum, once in a quarter, we double check. And if we're not sure, we ask for it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps it's something you can even, compare and contrast with your friends.
Good point.
Right? Because you've got colleagues that are in a similar situation. Sure. And to be honest, everyone's pay is quite transparent in the system. We're not going to say, oh, why are you getting paid $5 than I am? Because we're all on the same EBA.
Sure.
So in a way, there isn't that, I guess you can say, professional jealousy where some in other industries where they compare pay slips. My wife works in corporate, and that's a completely taboo topic to talk about what pay rates you're getting. So whereas for us, it's like, well, we're all on the same thing together. I guess from the employment perspective, and any sort of pearls of wisdom that you would like to share? I mean, you already shared a couple of these.
No, thank you. Sooner you handle it, better it is. I can give this example that one of my clients that we had to go through the same thing, and we had to go through last about 3 years of sort of an underpayment on a whole bunch of things. This allows this, everything gets underpaid. The challenge is that in our client's case, right, is that we want this, and we had to go through quite a bit. We had to reconcile. The client had to do a whole bunch of reconcile. At the end, we won it. Right, and we've got, let's say as an example, let's assume that we've got about 80 odd grand back, right? Challenge with that 80 odd grand back is that our challenge was at that stage, what do I do with that 80 odd grand which came in now? What would be the tax withheld on that 80,000?
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Now, because tax is always being paid on a cash basis, is that my doctor is that she was in that lower income gone up.
And now you're getting taxed
right?
At the
And because
bracket.
it's sort of over the last 4 years, is that technically if a little bit of here, a little bit of here, a little bit of here, a little bit of here was paid, marginal tax rate would have been lower because the income was lower. Now she already is at a higher level of tax rate. Then she's getting, let's say, another 80 odd grand on top of it, is that the tax is quite significant, right, in there on the marginal rate. And I must say that unfortunately we could not win this one, right?
There's not much you can do about that.
Because we went back and we said that we want to go back all those 4 years, and they said there's no way we can go back and amend last 4 years of everyone's system and process. That's your income. You wanted to get 80 grand. You've got your 80 grand, your tax is your obligation. And there was a genuine gap of extra tax my client had to pay simply because of the higher marginal rate. So I suppose the comment which I say is that very often is the prevention, right?
Find problems sooner than later, because it's more painful to deal with it later.
And costly.
Like in healthcare. And costly as well. Well, yeah, so I mean, that's very good advice. I think we've all seen some horror stories. And I guess my comment on that is we should never assume that someone else is doing everything right. So you always have to have a bit of vigilance on this. And, the fact that you review this every so often with either your accountant or yourself or with your colleague, or even with your family member if you don't understand these things. I think that's a very, very good piece of advice.
And sometimes it doesn't come in naturally to us, right? Because it's sort of almost what is our natural inclination, right? Whether all the numbers and everything else naturally comes in to sort of the doctor's mind, in the sense that your mind is nurturing, your mind is analytic, but these are just numbers, right? So we don't need to be a specialist, but we still need to know enough so that we can ask the question to a specialist if it needs to be, that whether it's being done right.
All right. So I guess to conclude, it's just that, everyone starts off their career as an intern in medicine, at least. And it is very important that you have some basic understanding of how you're getting paid, what are the terms you're getting paid, and what, you're getting mispaid at, because that is often a thing we hear amongst junior doctors, is that, hey, why is my payslip like this? And there isn't really a good avenue. I encourage people to talk about these things amongst their friends, their colleagues, their family members as well, because your parents would have had a lot more experience in this sort of thing, and of course your accountant, at least on a once yearly basis. When you know the fundamentals and the general knowledge, then you can ask questions when you feel that something isn't right, and many times it might be correct, but you got to be a bit aware and self-aware of these things. So thank you for listening, everyone. I hope that was a very educational session especially amongst the junior doctors. And we look forward to speaking more on these topics and other topics that you find helpful.
Thank you very much. Thank you, B.
Thank you, Munzural.